Welcome to the College Football Debrief on the CFB on OSG with your host, the Online Sports Guys.
Tommy Palmer, thank you, and welcome to the College Football Debrief. It's time to preview the Pac-12 Conference, a league that has been playoff challenged as of late. John Wilkerson here in the padded room, and across the way is my friend, Anthony Goldman.
Yeah, well, when I came in this morning, what did I tell you, John, right away? Let's do it. Let's go do the Pac-12 preview right now. I was geared up this morning.
And he was so geared up that Anthony's going to take the lead this time.
Yeah,
so Anthony, the floor is yours.
This could be an absolute mess, but I'm going to run what we call point today. So I will set you up with the topics. John has no idea what order we're going to go in, so I'm probably going to totally catch him off guard. But let's start off like you usually like to do, John. It's a little big picture thing talking about the Pac-12.
Sure.
So the Pac-12 media days are all done. All the conferences have been through. And when you look at the Power 5 conferences, the Pac-12 is the one that people leave out of the playoff prediction phase right now. Mm-hmm. They don't have that number one powerhouse program at the top currently that all your other conferences have. So they kind of get a bad rap. And, you know, Larry Scott, the commissioner, has had a lot of negative vibes around him. When you look at this conference right now, what do you think is the biggest hang-up that people have on a perception-wise as why the Pac-12 is viewed as being, I don't want to say lower, but the bottom of the Power 5?
Well, I think the obvious issue with the Pac-12 is that it's out in the West Coast. So most of your major media outlets are in the East Coast, New York, Boston, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Miami, especially the college football, because the Southeast is kind of where the hub of college football is, where we're located. Those games kick off at 10 o'clock for most people.
Right.
And after a full day of watching football, now this doesn't bode for you and me because we're up until God knows when watching the Pac-12.
We're college football masochists, right?
Right. But for the majority of the casual fan or any kind of college football fan, they start checking out about 10 o'clock. They've had a full, and they got an NFL day to go through the next day. So I think that's the obvious perception right there, that you're out in the West Coast. The other thing is it's just not part of the culture out there. I lived out in the West Coast for 3 years. There are people that love football, but it's not ingrained in their culture like it is around here. And in the upper Midwest, and even in Texas and Oklahoma and around there, where it is ingrained in the culture. Out there, you've got so many distractions. You know, obviously the professional sports, but you've got the weather that seems to be always perfect, especially in Southern California and
right.
Arizona. You've got the beautiful outdoors in the Pacific Northwest. There's just a lot of distractions. And I think that's where college football out west gets hurt.
And see, the things that you just mentioned are things that they unfortunately cannot change. You know, I heard debates this summer about the Pac-12, the West Coast games ending at 2 a.m. on the East Coast. Mm-hmm. You can't move those because, you know, you have to play them in prime time in your market. And if you play I'm just throwing teams out, a Utah-USC game at 3:30 Eastern time on a Saturday, mm-hmm. it's going to get swallowed up by the SEC game of the week, mm-hmm. by the ACC if Clemson's playing, by Michigan, Ohio State. People are just programmed to not think about the Pac-12 in their main viewing slots on the East Coast. So I don't think you can go head-to-head. And right now you don't have the brands or the markets to be able to go head-to-head with those teams in their current forms.
Right. Now, let me throw out some positives, though, as far as the Pac-12, if I may. I never thought L.A. would become a college football town. But when the Rams and the Raiders left L.A. and Southern Cal started winning national championships, they became the focal point of football in L.A.
Absolutely.
And right now, I think they still are, even though they had a mediocre year last year, a 5-7 year last year. For some reason, the Rams and the Chargers are just not resonating in L.A. Now, that may have changed a little bit, but I still think Southern Cal is the focus of football in that city. The other thing, too, and this goes along with when I lived out west, there are some good, solid fan bases out west that I don't think a lot of people know about. And unfortunately, they're buried because of the lack of attention. And I look at the Arizona Wildcats.
Yeah.
When I lived out there, that was back when they had the Cactus Curtain, and they were one of the top 5 teams in the country when Dick Tomey was the head coach, and that fan base was energized, and it reminded me so much of an SEC fan base. And even though they've had some decent years with Rich Rodriguez, and now they're somewhat in a rebuilding phase with Kevin Sumlin, that fan base still sticks with that program. And a lot of it is it's a mid-sized college town out in the middle of nowhere, like a lot of the SEC schools.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And I think Oregon kind of feels the same way. I think that fan base is a lot better than people expect. And I think Washington State is building one. They've got a charismatic coach, the Pirate, and they're kind of building their fan base. And to me, Washington State is the Pac-12's version of Clemson and Auburn. Out in the middle of nowhere, a small town with a large university with a Power 5 football program. Now, it's nowhere near on par with those two schools.
Right.
But with the success they've been having, it's starting to build.
Right. Well, and you're right on all your points, but going back to the problem with the time zones, the problem with being on the West Coast, those are problems the Pac-12 has they cannot control.
Right.
One problem they have that they can control, which they've completely botched, is their Pac-12 network. And there's been a lot of debate about the Pac-12 network and how it's ran and how it's done and how it affects, you and I, with the jobs that our daytime jobs we get paid for, we kind of understand a little bit of TV business and how markets work and how revenue shares work. A lot of fans, though, they don't really think about the Pac-12 network hurting the growth of that conference. Is there anything that you can think of how their network not being exposed is hurting their growth long term?
Obviously, the exposure is the big part of it. I think the obvious answer would be the product that's on the field, especially on the football field. If this was the Pac-12 of the mid to late 70s when Southern Cal was winning national championships, and UCLA when Terry Donahue was the head coach was right there on their heels, and that rivalry was in fever pitch. If you had some of that, I think that would really help the Pac-12 network, because that'd be a game you could hype. Yeah. And then the Washington teams of Don James, if you had, because you had some really great players up there in Washington, and that's a media hub too in Seattle. If you had those, then perhaps in their heyday, perhaps that would help. But I think the product on the field. The other thing too is I think the Pac-12 network concentrated way too much on the non-revenue sports and exposing them and giving them a little more priority than men's college basketball and football. And then marketing stars. I mean, that's the one thing the SEC network does a great job of. Not only do they market the stars of the SEC, but they have recognizable faces, a.k.a. Paul Feinbaum, and some of the top talent of ESPN on there that when you see Paul Feinbaum on the screen, you're going to stop and watch and see what kind of characters he's got on the show. Pac-12 doesn't have that.
Right.
Not that I'm aware of.
No.
We don't get it out here in the padded room.
Yeah, I've only seen it twice.
Yeah, here in Metro Atlanta, where we're located. So I think there's a lot of factors there, and I think the main reason is the product on the field.
Well, and you know what I think it's affecting the most, if to answer the question from my perspective, I think you could point to recruiting. I think that it has honestly hurt recruiting, and hear me out on this.
I agree.
Years ago, we know you recruited mostly regionally, and it was because of the TV packages. We've talked about this before. 3 national games a week. If you wanted to be on national TV, you could go to Nebraska, Notre Dame, Ohio State, and you could see mom and dad could watch you play no matter where you lived.
Yeah.
Cable TV changed the way people recruit, and it hurt some traditional powers. The problem now, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma have had a lot of success in the last 3 years recruiting in California, particularly Southern California. Mm-hmm. And do you know that there is a good amount of recruits in California that can watch the SEC network and can't watch the Pac-12 network?
Yeah,
it's not even carried in their own region.
That's a good point.
So I think that has done a bad job of hurting their recruiting base, and I think you can put the network at fault for that to some degree. Now, I don't want to end all negative because we're about to wrap up and break down teams. Let's talk positive. And one of the positives that me and you have crowed all about last year was the Pac-12. Everybody thinks offense, spread, blah, 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 lots of points. Whoever gets to 50 first wins. That's really not been the play of these teams in the last 2 years. There's been some good defenses in this conference, John. And last year, particularly the teams that were at the top, your Washington, even your Washington State at times, Oregon, Cal, Utah, they all play really solid defense. So I think – do you think it's time that we stop labeling this as a quarterback and offensive conference first?
Yes, I do, because for the points you just mentioned, you had at least 5 teams that had really good defense. I don't have the national defensive numbers in front of me from last season, but you mentioned 5 teams that were rock solid. And the thing I've noticed about the Pac-12 teams is those guys are getting a little bigger, but they're also great lateral speed between sideline to sideline.
Yeah,
that's why SEC defenses are so good. And guys like Mario Cristobal has made that an emphasis as far as their defensive recruiting. I know Washington has. Chris Peterson had those type of players at Boise State. He just didn't have enough of them.
Right.
And he can get enough of them in Washington. Those are really good points. And, Utah, the Utes last year, they were fun to watch on defense.
Yes.
They just went out and just annihilated you. Your head snapped back whenever you got hit by a Ute. So you're right. I think we need to start moving that perception from this being a wide-open quarterback league. And it's still a quarterback league, but defenses have really caught up, and they're getting better. I think that's a huge positive for this league.
Another positive for this league, out of all the conferences that have divisions, this conference probably has the best balance in between divisions. Mm-hmm. And how about we start breaking down these divisions? Next segment, let's break them down. Let's start north. We'll go north first.
You want to go Pac-12 North?
We'll go Pac-12 North next.
And obviously, Anthony and I, we would like to travel out west and watch a Pac-12 team. And
who wouldn't?
And when we do, where are we going to go to get our tickets? We're going to go to SeatGiant.com. Just type in SDH. It helps you, and it helps us. So when you check out, type in SDH. It's SeatGiant.com. When we come back, it is the Pac-12 North.
Hey, what's going on, y'all? This is Rock at the What's Up Falcons podcast, and I'm joined with my boys. My boys in the house. Where you at?
Yeah. What up?
Oh, gee, and we have Q, and we have Hoop in the house.
Q's here, the most beloved guy in all of sports entertainment.
Indeed. Hey, y'all, we want to thank everyone for listening to us, and if you want to listen to some great Falcons information, check us out on the What's Up Falcons podcast. Right, fellas?
Right. Sir. Hey, we here every week, baby.
We keeping it real, so check us out. I'm there on Twitter. Holla. Peace.
Subscribe to the What's Up Falcons podcast on iTunes and SoundCloud. Listen to the What's Up Falcons podcast at whatsupfalcons.com.
The OSG Sports app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG Sports app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Get the OSG Sports app today.
And welcome back into the College Football Debrief. Anthony Goldman sitting alongside the very knowledgeable John Wilkerson, the knower of all things college football. And we are breaking down the Pac-12. We are starting in the Pac-12 North, John. And looking at the Pac-12 North, this is an interesting division because the media made their votes at media days for the conference. And there's, out of the 6 teams, the top 4 kind of fought for first place on votes. I mean, there are 4 programs in this division that are all kind of stacked up. Now, depends on who you are as to where you order them. Oregon, Washington, Stanford, and Washington State. It's not the Big Ten East, but This is a pretty impressive 4 for a division in college football.
It is, and, you look at Oregon and Washington, and Oregon is really improving on defense because we've mentioned on defense the last block. Washington is established on defense. And then you've got two bitter rivals, which really nobody knows about nationally. Yeah, you and I get it, but it's as nasty as the Iron Bowl. I mean, it just doesn't get the hype that it should. So I like how balanced that is. And then you have a Stanford team that is just rock solid on both sides of the ball. They don't do anything to wow you. All they do is just beat you up and get a W here and there. But I think Stanford's going to have some issues as far as scheduling. Washington State, they lost Gardner Minshew. When a Washington State team or any Mike Leach team is kind of under the radar, that's when I'm scared of them. Because they still have some decent players, and they've got a couple of quarterbacks that are battling for the spot, and they're not going to be Gardner Minshew, but that with what they have, they're going to be productive.
Yeah, remember the name Gage Gabrud. He was from Eastern Washington. Similar to Gardner Minshew, he comes in kind of late, right as spring camp's ending up. I think he's going to end up being maybe not the hype that we saw with Gardner Minshew with the mustache and whatnot, but I do think that Gage Gabrud is going to be a pretty well-known name, especially in the Pac-12 by the end of the year. Looking at the top, so let's start with Oregon. And last year when we were previewing the Pac-12, we spent a lot of time on Washington, who were the Pac-12 favorites, and Washington being the college football playoff representative from the Pac-12. We thought they had the best chance, and we talked ad nauseum about the game in Atlanta against Auburn.
Yeah, we did.
This year, it's Oregon's turn. Oregon opens up against Auburn and Arlington, and I'm going to pose the same question I posed to you last year. How important for not just Oregon, but for the conference is this game?
It is huge because it's going to be on national TV. Oregon, for the past 20 years, has been that team with the millennials who they identify with the crazy helmets, with the light bulb yellow uniforms, and the Nike swoosh on everything.
Yeah,
they are they're the modern college football team, I guess best way to put it. And last year, Washington had the best quarterback coming into the season in Browning. Now you got Justin Herbert as the big-time quarterback.
He's the
face of the conference. Exactly. He's got to have a big game. You hate to have a lot of pressure put on a program like this right off the bat, but they've got it. I tend to think that it's going to be a very similar game because what happens when teams face the SEC is they kind of soil their britches. Washington didn't really do that last year, but they came pretty close.
Yeah.
Oregon, I think, probably can get it done.
Well, Oregon, where Washington fell last year, was in the trenches late in that game against Auburn. So it'd be interesting to see how Oregon's offensive line does. Looking at Oregon.
Yes, but the first half of that game against Auburn, Washington was very tentative.
Yeah.
Oregon can't be tentative.
No, and they won't be. They're way too aggressive on offense. As you mentioned with Justin Herbert at quarterback, but they have a lot of good weapons. They always have speed there. Jalen Reed at wide receiver, Brian Addison coming in. And the defense, again, we mentioned Oregon's defense. Troy Dye, their weak side linebacker, is one of the best linebackers in the country. Troy Dye is very impressive, just tackle to tackle playing football. Kayvon Thibodeau was the number one recruit in college football last year, and Oregon pulled him away from Florida State at the midnight hour to get him to go to Eugene. So there are some players on both sides of the ball for this team. Mario Cristobal, year 2, 9-4 last year. A lot of questions, and you and I were critical, I guess, at times of Mario Cristobal, how he would play out at Oregon. Was he the right fit? He's done what we thought he would do. He's recruited very well.
Yes, he
Players
has.
love him. Do you like the direction where Oregon is going, and do you see Oregon getting back to the Chip Kelly Oregons that we saw as recent as 7-8 years ago?
I like the direction they are going because, I'm just looking at the recruiting class coming in this year. There's a lot on the defensive end and on the offensive line as well. And as well as I do, you've got to control that part of the ball. You've got to control the line to be successful in any level of college football. And Mario Cristobal gets that. And he's recruited that way. And I think that's going to pay some big dividends. May not be this year, but probably next year. I think Oregon right now, with the skill players they have and some of the talent they already have in place, is probably, definitely the favorite, in my opinion, to win the North. But this is a team that could probably sneak into the playoff because of their reputation, because of the eye test. I think they're probably the best team in the Pac-12 that can pass that eye test with that committee. They just got to get some wins. I mean, they got to beat Auburn. I mean, that is right now, right at the beginning of the season, that is a must-win for them. And then they've got to protect the home turf. They got to win at Autzen Stadium. And then you got to beat Washington in Seattle in October. Those are those are perception setters that the Pac-12 really lacks. And if Oregon can get that done, the Auburn win has to happen for all those dominoes to fall. And if that does happen, then Oregon's in good shape. I'm also, they avoid Utah this year, which we'll talk about the South a little later, but they do avoid the Utes, and that's a good thing for them.
100% agreed on that Auburn game. They have to win it. So let's move to Washington, who did not win the Auburn game last year. A lot of talent on this team. I know that they lose the quarterback, but insert Jacob Eason, the prodigal son, returns home from Washington after a brief spell in Athens. So now he gets to come in as the starting quarterback. Cannon of an arm. You and I got to see him play pretty well in this area. Strong arm, and he comes in with a team that's very, very talented. Probably has one of the best tight ends in college football in Hunter Bryant, a lot of experience at wide receiver. And defensively, they have a lot of returning seniors and juniors as well. So looking at Washington, I know that they have to replace the quarterback, but do you feel like it's a little premature to just throw Oregon as the undisputed favorite in this division and forget about what Chris Peterson's built there?
No, because Chris Peterson's been there and done that. If you can win on the consistent basis he did at Boise State and elevate that program the way he did, I mean, at Washington, he's got better recruits, he's got better facilities, he's got more money to play with, and I just think he's a damn good coach.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be a two-way race between Oregon and Washington. Again, it's probably who's going to win that game in October as to who's going to win that division. But, Washington does a good job of recruiting to their needs. And I think that goes back to his philosophy with Boise State, where you really had to hit a home run every guy you brought in, because especially after that Oklahoma win in the Fiesta Bowl, because now they were on the national stage.
Right.
And I think he does a good job Chris Peterson does, and his staff of recruiting to need. And I think it was a great coup to get Jacob Eason to transfer in and come home. And, I think he's going – I think the Eastern Washington game is going to be good for him because, Eastern Washington is one of the powers in the FCS.
Yeah.
So they're not going to be a pushover. And he's going to get used to the system. He's going to get used to his surroundings. And I think once he breaks the ice in that game, I think he'll feel more comfortable and be one of the top quarterbacks in the Pac-12.
They do not have one of the big non-conference headliners this year like they normally have. However, their conference schedule is pretty tough. They do have USC at home. They go to Stanford, to Arizona. They have Utah at home, Oregon at home, as you mentioned, on October 19th, which is their homecoming. That's interesting. So it's a good conference schedule.
It's interesting.
But it does set up for them that if – basically they have to go unbeaten to make the playoff, but they have a schedule that they don't have that marquee game out of conference, which is a good and bad thing because it makes their conference schedule manageable.
If you're looking for one hiccup, though, that game on September 21st in Provo, that scares me.
I could see that. Especially right before USC. It's the week before USC. That's a good trap game. And right after USC, they travel down to the Farm. So let's talk them next, the Stanford Cardinal. A lot of people have them picked third right now in the Pac-12 North. It just kind of seems like at this point, it's ho-hum, 9 wins, 8 wins, 9 wins, 10 wins. David Shaw, it's expected. I mean, if you were born after 1999 and you're a college football fan, you probably think that Stanford is a perennial 8 or 9 win team. It's unbelievable the consistency that he's built there. And again, John, looking at this year, I mean, with KJ Costello back at quarterback, if he can stay healthy, we know they're always going to run by committee and play physical football. I mean, this looks like the same preview of Stanford that we've done the last 5 years, correct?
Yeah, but Michael Wilson or Connor Weddington is going to have to match the production they got from J.J. Arcega-Whiteside. I mean, he was one of the top receivers in the country, and he was a guy that could change a game with one catch. And they're going to miss that productivity at that position. But you're right. Stanford, if you were born before 2000, or after 2000, you would think this is one of the most consistent programs in the Pac-12. And, don't forget it was Jim Harbaugh that really got that ball rolling as head coach, and then David Shaw just kind of took the reins and stayed with it. They coach up guys probably the best way I've seen in college football. They don't make mistakes. They don't beat themselves. They punch above their weight class. Sometimes that costs them. They're kind of in the mold of the Northwestern, the Dukes right now. They're just probably the top program of the the smart schools. Yeah. I'm not sure what the proper term would be when I'm comparing all these, but Stanford's kind of the gold standard, and then you got Northwestern, and then you got Duke, and then you got Vandy, and so they're the gold standard. They're the ones that you want to emulate, and the other schools I mentioned are starting to read the blueprint that David Shaw put together and trying to make it work for them.
It's funny because most SEC fans, Stanford is their favorite Pac-12 team.
Yeah.
Like if you ask most SEC people, they're all Stanford fans. You mentioned the needing playmakers to step up at wide receiver. One guy I'll say to keep an eye on, his brother, Equanimous St. Brown. Well, little brother Osiris St. Brown is a sophomore now at Stanford. Osiris is a little bit shorter than his older brother at Notre Dame, but he does have that quickness off the line. Really good with his hands, fights DBs off the line pretty physically. So he'll be a guy that they could factor in this year in their passing game and could make a big impact. They start the season off hosting Northwestern, which is an intriguing game. That's going to be an interesting game.
Speaking of smart schools.
Yes, and a physical game as well.
Yes.
They also go to UCF, which is another interesting one on week 3. Their opening to the season, John, is pretty brutal. Northwestern at USC, at UCF, Oregon at home. Those first 4 games are pretty tough.
Well, then you get the game at Oregon State, and then you host Washington. I mean, their 5 of the first 6 games are going to be brutal, and if they can survive 3-3 in that might be a tremendous accomplishment. You would like to see a 5-1 if you're a Stanford fan, but man, that is just. I mean, how many? You've got 3 road games in the first 6 games of the season. And, that's just brutal. And look at the close.
Yeah.
I mean, you go to Colorado.
Yeah.
You go to Pullman, take on Washington State. You host Cal, and then you host Notre Dame.
Yeah. It's a brutal schedule. I mean, looking at this schedule, I always want to find a way for Stanford to win the Pac-12 North. But looking at this schedule, I think 8-4 is a pretty big achievement for this team, and that's probably what they're looking at. But 8 wins with this schedule, to me, is something that you should not scoff at.
No, give them a medal.
So let's move on to the other team everybody talks about, Washington State, our last team. And we mentioned them a little bit earlier. Gage Gabrud. I've still learned how to say his name, but I guarantee you we'll know how to say it by the end of September.
Somebody from Seattle will let us know.
12-gauge Gage comes in
Pullman,
to throw the football from Eastern Washington. And again, it's another quarterback coming in.
12-gauge Gage. I like that.
Another quarterback transfers in for Mike Leach. We know what we're going to get from Mike Leach. I do feel like a little underrated running game last year for the Cougars. They were pretty physical at times, and they played better defense. I know we love the Pirate and all the high-flying stuff, but this ain't your daddy's Mike Leach offense or team, John. They were physical last year.
And my hat's off to Tracy Claeys, their defensive coordinator.
100%.
Because he put together some really good defensive game plans. And when they had to make plays, they made plays on defense. That's what really impressed me. They bring some nice playmakers back on defense. I thought Jalen Thompson was a guy at safety that did a great job stopping the run last year. And when called upon, he was great for on the pass game. Marcus Strong was a really good corner for him last year. And then you look at the linebacking core. That 3-4 defense of theirs, I mean, they fly around the ball and they get people down. And to me, that's one of the big keys for Washington State.
Totally agree. Their schedule, again, sets up where they have some tough road games this year. They go at Utah September 28th. They have to go to Oregon, and then they end the year at Washington in the Apple Cup. So, again, I don't think that you can put them winning the North this year, but they will definitely help decide who does win it. I want to hit real quick on Cal. You and I have been Cal, Justin Wilcox fans since we started this podcast. And 2 years ago when we started this podcast, we loved what Cal was doing. We loved their preseason outlook, and they played really good football, and it resulted in a 5-7 record. Last year, we felt like we needed to see them finish games a little better. They were able to do that at the beginning of the year and at parts at the end, but the middle – they kind of struggled again with teams they should have beat, and they finished 7-6. So now here we are once again, feeling like Cal could overachieve a little bit. I think when you talk Cal, you got to start defense. This is the best secondary in the Pac-12, in my opinion. I don't think there's any other team that can match up with what these guys have at corners with Cameron Bynum and Elijah Hicks. You got Ashton Davis, Jalen Hawkins at safeties. I mean, they are very impressive.
Backfield.
Some of those guys are a little smaller, but they play like they're 6'2". They're very physical. And this defense as a whole is really good. Is this going to be another year where we enjoy watching Cal and they play physical, but they're still about a 7-win team?
We always enjoy watching the Golden Bears. Just break out those 1975 uniforms again. And Anthony and I need those jerseys, too, to wear. They just got to have some kind of offensive production. I mean, we talk about how great that defense is. They can't score all the time. I mean, that defensive backfield, they can get you 2 touchdowns just because of the ball hawking that they do back there.
Yeah.
But just give me some kind of offensive production. Chase Garber is their quarterback. If he can just, manage the game and make some good throws and make some good decisions, then we could talk about an 8 or 9 win Cal team because they're that good on defense. Now, their schedule-wise, I don't like the way that starts September. I mean, you go after opening against Irvine and Berkeley, you go to Seattle to take on the Huskies, and then North Texas comes to
it's a losable game.
I'm going to say in Berkeley, North Texas. I mean, they've won against SEC teams on the road, and then they go to Oxford. And then they close September hosting Arizona State. And then you go to Oregon.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a tough start for them.
You could have 1 or 2 wins by the bye week.
Exactly. That's true. And then you've got Utah and Salt Lake City, and you close at Stanford and at UCLA. They're probably – I'm going to go by the eye test here. They may be better, but their record isn't going to be better.
I 100% agree with you on that. I am extremely excited, by the way, for that September 21st game when they go to Oxford. Because remember a couple years ago, Ole Miss went out to Berkeley and kind of got embarrassed a little bit. People down here, their SEC pride got hurt with, little lowly Cal out physicaling Ole Miss and beating them by 2 touchdowns. So that'll be an interesting game to watch. And let's wrap up real quick with the bottom feeder as voted on by the media in the Pac-12, the Oregon State Beavers. And, John, I made a comment to you earlier that I'm not saying that they're going to shock everyone and compete or win the Pac-12 North or nothing crazy like that. But I may be more excited to watch Oregon State this year than almost any other team that we've talked about because of what Jonathan Smith has done with bringing in talent. They are a young, talented bunch. They don't have a lot of depth, if at all. But they do have some really young, talented guys, and Jamar Jefferson is probably the best running back that you've never heard of. I mean, Jamar Jefferson is a fantastic physical back. He's got great speed. They have talent. The problem is they can't block anybody. So looking at this Oregon State team, do you share my optimism that they may at least be exciting to kind of keep an eye on?
Yeah, because, I'm looking at their recruiting class from 2019, and they did a good job cultivating California and getting some guys with some kind of burst at the skill positions. And it looks like they've got some really good defensive players that can be a difference maker. But, you got to give Jonathan Smith time because I think that he inherited a mess in Corvallis. And the fact that they went 2-10 last year was probably an overachievement. And you got a road win in the league in Boulder against Colorado in a fantastic game. They probably overachieved at that 2-10 record. He's a native son. Jonathan Smith is. Give him at least another 4 or 5 years as he's developing the talent base. It's tough to recruit to Corvallis, Oregon, but it can be done. They've had early 2000s. They consistently won for about 4 or 5 years.
Oh yeah,
so it can be done. But I agree with you. I really liked what he's doing, what Jonathan Smith is doing with the Beavers. And by the way, if you looked at their new uniforms, they call themselves the Beavs now.
The Beavs. Yeah, how about that?
Those are cool uniforms, by the way.
They are cool, but it'll take me a while to get used to calling them the Beavs. Jonathan Smith, a lot of people have compared him to Chris Peterson because of his background under Chris Peterson. But there's some interesting quotes at Pac-12 Media Days where he's kind of shadowed Kyle Whittingham a little bit and how he's looking to build out his program, which I thought was a great, comparison to use. And that's a good segue to say, how about let's take a break and then talk Pac-12 South when we come back.
We'll do that. But I got one interesting side note about Oregon State.
Bring it to me.
Look who they open up against.
Oklahoma State. Yeah.
2 orange and black OSUs.
Yes.
I leave you with that as we go to break. The Pac-12 South when we return.
Want tickets to the big game? Go to SeatGiant.com. Use the code SDH at checkout. It helps you and it helps us. That's SeatGiant.com.
College football fans, check out the College Football Debrief. Here's a sample of what you get.
Let's say Mike Gundy has a couple of weeks in June and his wife comes to him and it's like, let's go on a vacation. And most people when they go on vacation, they go to like the Bahamas or the beach, somewhere like that. I could see him being like, okay, let me book it. And they go to like a dude ranch in Montana. Like, that's what I picture.
Well, that's a good one. But I was thinking about, let's go to Cheyenne, Wyoming and check out the Cheyenne Frontier Days.
Yeah.
Or to Calgary, Alberta, to the Calgary Stampede.
Yeah, let's go to the Stampede. He's had to have gone to the Stampede, right? If he hasn't, he will one day. There's no doubt.
How many Stetsons do you think are in his closet?
Oh, he might have a whole closet for him. I say that. I don't know if he wears a Stetson because you can't mess up the mullet.
That's true.
The mullet has to be free.
It's boots.
Yeah, the boots, yes. He has. If you watch him in all seriousness, he does have a different pair of cowboy boots on just about every single day.
You can catch the College Football Debrief on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Check out the College Football Debrief on the OSG Podcasting Network.
And welcome back to the College Football Debrief. Anthony Goldman, John Wilkerson, getting ready for some Pac-12 South breakdown. And starting off with the Pac-12 South, let's go with the media's darling this year. If you've read any preseason magazine, you've listened to any show talking college football, getting you ready, everyone loves the Utah Utes. And it's kind of interesting looking at this Utah team coming into this year because they returned so many starters on both sides of the ball. They have the best defense in the Pac-12 by far from top to bottom. And you look at their offense, Tyler Huntley, injured last year, coming back, junior or senior quarterback, a lot of experience. And Zach Moss, who is probably the most underrated player maybe in the conference, the way he can shift in his run ability at running back. They've got some stars on this team, John. Are you buying into the hype that Utah's gotten in the preseason?
I think I picked them last year to win the South.
You did. You sure did.
I liked them last year, and I still like them this year. They just got to stay away from the injuries. That's what set them back. They still got to the title game.
Yeah, and only lost by a touchdown.
Yeah, and so it was still a a championship, division championship year for them. But, us here in the Southeast, we love to say, well, that looks like an SEC team. Utah, to me, fits that moniker. I mean, they have power backs with speed. They got a quarterback that's a little bit above paint by numbers. They've got guys on the out wide on offense that can separate and make catches. And they've got defensive or offensive linemen that can move the earth. They've got defensive linemen that can stop, and what I talked about earlier about the lateral speed that we've talked about and that's been lacking in the Pac-12.
Yep.
They've got that. And then they've got a ball-hawking defensive backfield.
Yeah.
So they have all the elements that people in our region where we're from like a lot.
Right.
And, I think they may have some issues in some positions with depth, but who doesn't? But when you look at this Utah team on paper and you look at that roster, this is a Pac-12 championship type team.
Absolutely. You cannot question the defense at all. We know how solid they're going to be, so I'm not even going to break it down. Offensively, you brought up a good point about Tyler Huntley. A lot of people think, when they think Utah quarterbacks, or really any kind of quarterback in that style that Kyle Whittingham coaches, they think of game manager, doesn't turn it over. It's going to be about 18 for 28 on a night for 240 yards and 2 touchdowns. Mm-hmm. Tyler Huntley's more than that. He's got pretty active legs. He can run around in the pocket. He's got a strong arm. He can throw downfield. And if they can get more playmaking ability out of their wide receivers,
right.
And Jalen Dixon, to me, could be the answer for that, the sophomore. Mm-hmm. But if they can get some better big play ability, this team could be impressive on offense. And you add an impressive offense with an impressive defense, you better look out. I mentioned Zach Moss again. Zach Moss, please, if you haven't watched him, when Utah plays, watch Zach Moss. He was hurt last year. He has got maybe the best vision right now in college football.
And you brought up Jalen Dixon being a guy. They got a guy also coming in that redshirt last year, Brian Thompson, who could also be that guy you're talking about to stretch the field and to make the big catches. So if
he's a tall boy too.
He's very tall, and so if you got those two, Thompson and Dixon, to choose from, Tyler Huntley doesn't really need to have to move around a lot. He's got some targets to throw to.
Absolutely,
and that just makes the Utes more dangerous.
Yes, it sure does. Now, I was kind of joking with you when we brought them up, like everybody loves them. Well, we know why everybody loves them because of this roster, but how much do we love them? That's the question. And here's what I'm going to pose to you. So we open up this season with the Holy War, which would be a good game at BYU.
In Provo. That's going to be interesting.
After BYU, they do not have a big non-conference game. They got Northern Illinois and Idaho State before they go to the Coliseum to open up conference play. Now, if you look at Utah's schedule this year, they do go to Washington. They avoid Oregon from the north. Mm-hmm. They have road trips also sandwiched in at Oregon State and then at Arizona at the end. So we already said the Pac-12 does not have a lot of national recognition right now. Is there a possibility that this Utah team could be 12-0 when they get to that Pac-12 title game?
I think there's a possibility. Especially if they can beat the Trojans in L.A., because I think that's kind of a hill they need to climb. Let's face it, as mediocre as Southern Cal's been lately, they are still the brand name in this league. Yeah. And if you can beat them in the Coliseum, then you've done something. But they've got to stay healthy. They can't have the rash of injuries they had last year. And if they can do that, 12-0 is possible. But the Pac-12 needs a team like that.
Yes, they do need a team like that.
And they're probably the best shot the Pac-12 has.
I agree with you on that. I think that they are a better team top to bottom than Oregon, who's a lot of people's favorites. And I'm not saying that they will beat Oregon. We'll get to predictions later. But I do think when you look at their roster top to bottom and the depth behind it, I think there's more balance at Utah than there is at Oregon.
Agreed.
You mentioned USC. I do want to say before we move on, they got to beat USC. Well, I got good news, bad news. The good news is that they've beat USC 3 of the last 5 years, John.
Right.
The bad news is they only beat USC on even years, and it's 2019.
It's an odd year.
It's an odd year.
Got to break the trend.
Got to break the streak. All right, so let's talk USC. And USC is We could spend 2 hours talking about USC because there's just it's a mess. It's interesting. It's exciting. Clay Helton back after a 5-7 year, which I thought was a bad decision to bring him back. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, but this is absolutely a prove me year for USC. And JT Daniels is a sophomore now. He took a lot of lumps last year in his freshman year. Mm-hmm. There's still some talent on this roster without a doubt. You know, Amon Ross, St. Brown, another one of those St. Brown brothers getting to step in. He's playing for USC this year. Their offensive line is pretty good. They've got some players on defense, but looking at USC, I mean, I feel like they have to, if not win the division, at least be in there. And do you have confidence that they will be in there?
Well, this is a program to me that is trying hard to change the offense, the way they do things on offense. And obviously they went after Cliff Kingsbury to bring his air raid, and that lasted, a couple of weeks before he decided to he saw what he was getting himself into, and he hightailed it to Tempe, Arizona, or the Phoenix, Arizona, to coach the Arizona Cardinals, which is its own dysfunctional franchise right now. So they bring in Graham Harrell, who with a very similar philosophy as Cliff Kingsbury, and it doesn't work because when I think of Southern Cal, I think of tailback U,
of course,
and I think about guys like Mark Sanchez, and quarterbacks like that had all these weapons around them. Maybe 2 or 3 great running backs. You had tight ends, you had receivers, and you had an offensive line that was probably, back in the Pete Carroll era, was as good as anything that Nick Saban's had, and he's had some damn good offensive lines. Yeah. You should know, you're an Alabama guy.
Absolutely. They had depth for days.
And it just seems like that since Clay Helton has got there, he's hell-bent on changing the offensive philosophy of Southern Cal to turn it into doing some cute things rather than just doing the things to win. And I think that's what killed him last year as far as the record last year. Because you look at that roster, those are some good players on that roster. The offensive line's got some issues, but those are some good skill position guys that they've been able to recruit and bring in. But what has saved Clay Helton as far as not losing his job is just all the bad perception that the university as a whole has gotten with the school president and everything that's gone on there. The latest admission scandal that we had back in the spring. I mean, they've been front and center on all that, and the athletic department with their own issues as well. And we're not just talking about football; we're talking about across the board. It's kind of saved them.
Yeah.
Because right now they can't do anything. They'd have to. I'm sure it's a big buyout for Clay Helton. I'm not sure what the numbers are, but they just can't do it.
Yeah. Usually when people host podcasts or host shows, they just set up guys for topics and don't weigh in. You threw out way too much, so I got to weigh in my opinion on some of that.
Sure.
Clay Helton last year, it was embarrassing that he went 5-7 with that roster that he had, especially on defense. That was such a talented defense.
I know.
They underachieved. He used T. Martin as his fall guy. T. Martin was the guy that was the martyr for the fans that blamed T for all their mishappenings. So now
he fell on the sword.
Yeah, he fell on the sword for Clay Helton. So now it's time for Clay Helton to deliver. And, losing T. Martin had a big impact on recruiting, had a massive impact on recruiting in the Southeast. But you can't keep a guy just because he can recruit. If you can coach, coaching's more important. You got to develop them when you get them there. And if this is a better direction, then I support that. I love Graham Harrell. I thought the job that he did at North Texas was fantastic running that offense and working with Mason Fine. I'm with you, though. I don't know how this fit is going to work. It's obvious this is the direction that Clay Helton wants his offense to go. But I don't think it fits the pieces that he has. And look, let's be honest. He doesn't have time for an experimental year.
No.
He better win. He better win, and 7 wins will not cut it. If they're 7-5, yes, better than last year. That's not good enough. I also think that this is a microcosm. It shows everything wrong with the school, but I think it's a really bad look for their athletic director, Lynn Swann. Lynn Swann, who everyone loves Lynn Swann. Who doesn't like Lynn Swann? Everyone likes him, but I think his reputation has been soiled a little bit by the way that this program and the way he's handled Clay Helton has went. You look at the struggles that Clay Helton's had. They have been horrible out of the gate in just about his entire tenure. They started 1-4 in 2016. They were 4-0 in 2017 until then they ended up losing right at the back end. And then last year, they're 2-2 before they went to Arizona, got it back a little bit, and then fell apart mid to late October. So the start of this year is going to be important for them. And you look at the start, Fresno State, Stanford, they're both at home. Then they go to BYU. I feel like all these teams play BYU. Then they play Utah at home on a Friday night at Washington. That's a tough start before you get to a bye week. I mean, I don't want to say he's not going to make it. By the way, I should mention after that said bye week, then they go to South Bend to play Notre Dame. I don't want to put him on the chopping block yet. But do you think that Clay Helton can, for one, can he get past the naysayers? Can he finally achieve it? And if he does not, will he make it to that October 12th game in South Bend?
I think he makes it to the October 12th game in South Bend. When they have their 7th loss and there's no hope for a bowl, then that's when I think you're going to start seeing things happen. Boosters are going to be writing checks. Yeah, I mean, and if it goes bad, it's going to go bad quickly. Anthony, we've established that Southern Cal is the gold standard in the Pac-12.
Yes.
Like Alabama is in the SEC, Clemson in the ACC. This USC team feels like to me the 2006 Alabama Crimson Tide.
That's a very good comparison. Yeah. It's a very good comparison. I'm with you on that. And I will say that I don't think Clay Helton's the answer. I said it all last year. I don't think he's the coach next year. I think he's going to fail. Now, if you're a USC fan, it might be good I'm saying that because the next school we're going to talk, I thought that coach was going to fail, and he ended up having a pretty decent year in year one, and that's Herm Edwards.
Would that be Arizona State?
That would be Arizona State. And, we poked a lot of fun at Herm Edwards last year, and Herm Edwards had a pretty good, especially at the start of the year. Now, they finished 7-6, but with the expectation of what they had, you could take a lot of positives out of that. And now coming into year two, this is a pretty interesting team. They're not nearly as deep as they were last year. They did lose a pretty good amount of talent, but looking at this team, John, there's some playmakers here. I mean, is Herm Edwards building something?
I think where we kind of made fun of it was how they were going to structure their program with a CEO, with the coordinators,
which for the record is still ridiculous.
Yeah, and then the coach that went to Louisiana Lafayette,
Billy Napier.
Billy Napier. Thank you. God, it just escaped my brain.
Random names floating around in my head.
Exactly. When he left, I think that rose some red flags to you and me because we really liked Billy Napier.
Well, he's the head coach in waiting.
Yeah, he was the head coach in waiting, and he went on to Lafayette and University of Louisiana and had a good year. But the one thing, and then you looked at Herm Edwards' NFL tenure, especially how it ended with the Chiefs, and you're going, what's going on here? But the guy can motivate, and it's almost like Pete Carroll, because Pete Carroll had a terrible audition with the NFL with the Jets and the Patriots. Trivia question: he was a coach with New England before Bill Belichick.
That's right.
And it took him a while to reestablish himself and get the USC job and totally rehab his career and then have the Super Bowl run with the Seahawks. And that's kind of how I feel, maybe an older version of Herm Edwards. But he's almost like what Pete Carroll did at Southern Cal. Everybody was scratching his head. Why are you bringing this reclamation project? And I think that's how we felt about Arizona State. And maybe his style does work with the 18-year-olds because Herm Edwards is kind of a funny guy. And he's got that NFL pedigree. He's the guy from the Miracle on the Meadowlands that he can sell. So maybe we way overestimated that hire. And I kind of like what he has here at Arizona State. I really like Eno Benjamin. I think he's going to be a workhorse for them, and he's going to be solid for Arizona State. And Frank Darby can get it done too. I just got to see if they got a quarterback. I know it looks like Dylan Sterling Cole is kind of slotted in as he's got to be the guy, though.
I love Eno Benjamin that you just mentioned. I think Eno Benjamin is another one of those running backs that people don't talk about, but he's a lot of fun to watch. If you get a chance to watch Arizona State, keep an eye on number 3 in the backfield. Eno Benjamin, he has some bursts. He can run. This team is replacing a lot. So they lost a lot on defense, especially. And they lost some big players at wide receiver. I mean, they do have Brandon Ayuk back. He's going to be their go-to guy. But the thing that interests me about this team, and this kind of all wraps itself around into a nice bow, you mentioned Herm Edwards and the way how does he connect to young kids? Mm-hmm. The thing that shocked me about Herm Edwards is that they've recruited pretty well. They have got some good players in. And at quarterback, I think they're probably going to go with the true freshman, Jaden Daniels. I really do. I think Jaden Daniels, Herm Edwards sees as the face of this program in the long term. And Jaden Daniels is one of those guys. He's 6'3", he's 190 pounds. He's a dual-threat guy. He throws really well on the run. I watched him last year at the 7-on-7 camp, and on rollouts, he's very accurate, especially 15 yards and under. He's pinpoint accuracy. He's got pretty good vision. He's almost a better passer. Now, I'm not going to say he can run as good as him, but he is a better passing version in a lot of ways of Khalil Tate. So seeing him in that offense, I'm excited to see what he can do.
And he was a star in the spring game.
Yes, he was a star in the spring game. And I think that he's probably going to be the guy that they hitch their wagon to. But Arizona State, after Utah, I think there's a pretty good gap. I know USC is picked to be number 2. They're such a mess. They could be anywhere from number 2 to number 5. But I think Arizona State is kind of battling for that third, possibly second spot in this division. And if the true freshmen can hold up, they may be able to make it. So let's move on now. Let's go to UCLA and a team that really surprised people with their first-year head coach last year, Chip Kelly, 3-9. Not a year that a lot of people saw coming, and it wasn't so much even on the field, but all the drama off the field last year. I felt like every week it was As the World Turns with Dorian Thompson-Robinson's dad and Chip Kelly, his freshman quarterback. Him and his dad, hopefully, John, they went fishing this offseason or, they at least had him over for a nice steak dinner, and they patched those holes up because he's going to have to be the way this offense goes as Dorian Thompson-Robinson, right?
I'm just curious about what that locker room is like because Chip Kelly's not a warm and fuzzy guy.
No, he is not.
And I think you've got a lot of guys on that roster that want to be kind of coddled. And Chip Kelly's not that kind of guy. So, in my opinion, UCLA could be 3-9 again, or they could be 9-3.
Yeah, I think the scale is that wide.
Yeah, and I don't think there's much in between. You're right. The offense has to go through Dorian Thompson-Robinson. They've got some nice pieces on offense. It's just how motivated are they going to be?
Right.
I really think Justin Fry, their offensive coordinator, has got to be that warm, fuzzy guy, be the yin to the Chip Kelly yang. And if he can get it done, then UCLA's probably got a good shot. And this conference needs UCLA, someone from the LA area, to be relevant.
Yes, 100%.
When they're both down like last year, it's just not good for the conference.
No, it's not good for the conference at all. And I do want to mention Joshua Kelly, the running back. He kind of had a coming out party last year against USC. Massive game against them and that upset win they had. If he can continue that momentum, it will go a long way in UCLA getting back to what people kind of expect them to be. They still got to grow. They have some really good defensive players. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce some of these guys' names, but Osa Digizua, I do know that one. I remember him from recruiting. Good defensive end. They're really good up front. I mean, really, they are good guys up front are very talented. So they have pieces. It's not like this roster's not talented. The recruiting did not go the way that we thought it would with Chip Kelly. I think, and this is just me theorizing, Chip Kelly was a good recruiter at Oregon. I think those facilities signed some more kids than Chip Kelly realized they did at Oregon. And I think now that he's at UCLA, and I mean, let's be honest, they're 20 years at best behind what they should be at facility-wise. I think he realizes that he's had to step his game up. You know, they did bring in a nutrition center at UCLA, which he ordered right away. He said they had to have that. So he's trying to bring those facilities back up, which hopefully will get those recruits up. But you got to win to get some of those kids coming in, and this is the year where they really need to win. And, John, you know, looking at their schedule, this is a tough schedule. You know, after you start at Cincinnati, you go San Diego State, and then OU comes to town.
Well, Cincinnati, we know what kind of team Luke Fickell has.
Yes.
And they're going to bloody your nose.
Yes.
And UCLA tends to fold.
Well, they beat them last year. Beat them by 9 points.
Yeah, they tend to fold when they get hit in the mouth like that. San Diego State's not going to be easy. OU, well, enough said. And then 2 road games, going to Pullman and then going to Tucson. Now, that's a rough September.
Yeah, and then after that, I mean, you get Oregon State followed by a bye, but then you have at Stanford, Arizona State, and Colorado. I mean, none of those games are gimmies. I'm with you. I mean, this team, the scale is so wide on this team that they're going to be a story either way. They're going to be a story if they turn it around and win 9 games because they're going to have to beat some quality teams to get those wins. But they could also be a story and be 3-9 because this schedule could eat them alive.
You brought up the facility aspect of the recruiting. He doesn't have a Phil Knight to rely on.
No.
Now, there's some Hollywood moguls that will write a check.
Yeah.
But it's not like Phil Knight is there to say, how much do you need?
Right.
I mean,
well, those Hollywood moguls, as we mentioned in the offseason, are too busy trying to get them into the ACC, right? Yeah.
That's right.
That's another podcast for another day. All right. Moving on. Another first-year coach from last year that fell on his face and is looking for a bounce back, Kevin Sumlin in Arizona.
Yeah.
5-7 record last year. It wasn't as much the record, John, as it was the misuse of Khalil Tate.
Yeah. I'm glad you said misuse. I had a different word for it.
Cam Akers and Khalil Tate were the 2 most misused players in college football last year.
Yeah.
And let me show you the differences, though, from everything that we know. And we don't know everything. We're not in meetings. But from all the information that you can gather, Florida State and Cam Akers went to a different scheme and a different system, and Cam Akers was on board and played his part and kept a positive attitude. He was the ideal team guy in that situation. I don't know if this is so much a coach just throwing blame, but to hear Kevin Sumlin say it was Khalil Tate's fault last year because Khalil Tate went to Kevin Sumlin and wanted him to turn him into more of a pocket passing quarterback. Well, that was a horrible idea, and Kevin Sumlin should have known he's not a pocket passing quarterback.
No.
But I think when you talk Arizona, you talk Khalil Tate, and it's hard for me to even preview this team because they're going to be whatever Khalil Tate is. And if Khalil Tate is the 2017 Khalil Tate, I think you got a team that could be competing for second in the South. If he's 2018 Khalil Tate, you got a bottom feeder.
Well, he's also got a guy named J.J. Taylor in the backfield that can relieve some of that pressure as far as the ground game.
Yeah, and Garrett Brightwell's good too. They have a great backfield.
I mean, Khalil Tate doesn't have to do it all, but he has to win games with his legs or at least have that perception against the opposing defense.
Yeah.
They didn't have that last year.
Right.
And he got killed. So I think Kevin Sumlin and Khalil Tate both have learned their lesson. And we're going to see the Khalil Tate, in my opinion, that we saw 2 years ago that was starting to get mentions for the Heisman Trophy.
Right.
And I think Arizona might be that team that is a lot better than we expect. This might be an 8-9 win team if those things fall right. Defensively, they're not bad. They're okay, but they're not bad. They're not the Cactus Curtain of the early 90s, but they can make plays when they have to. So Arizona might be that team that could climb the ladder more than we expect.
I agree with you on that. And, defensively, they have some players that are pretty good ball players. They just don't have any depth. And they're going to struggle all year on defense. But offensively, there's a lot to love. You mentioned the backfield. They've got maybe the best tandem of running backs in the Pac-12, at least in the Pac-12 South. I mean, J.J. Taylor gets all the headlines, but like we mentioned earlier, Gary Brightwell is another guy. I mean, I think they combined for over 2,000 yards last year. So they're going to keep pounding the rock. And keep an eye on this guy. You know how I love my freshmen, keep an eye on guys. Booby Curry, remember that name.
Another Booby.
Booby Curry, wide receiver, was committed to Florida State, bailed after the fiasco they had last year in the season, ended up going to Arizona. Booby Curry will factor in right away to this offense. So they have some weapons that they can use. I'm excited about this game at Hawaii the first week because I want to see what we're going to get from Khalil Tate, what he's going to be. They have Texas Tech at home week 3, which is another interesting game. But the thing about this schedule that kind of makes me wonder, can they bounce back, is look at their road games. At Colorado, at USC, at Stanford, at Oregon, at Arizona State.
Yeah.
All their big games are on the road.
Yeah.
They have lost 15 of their last 18 Pac-12 road games. So they have to get better on the road if they're going to take that next step.
The Colorado game is huge for them. And then back-to-back at USC and Stanford in late October. You go through that stretch 2-1, then you're looking at probably an 8-win season, maybe a 9.
Yeah.
But that you have to go 2-1 in that stretch. It's going to be hard. I can't see them winning it in Eugene, and it's a toss-up against Arizona State for the Territorial Cup. I mean that's the rivalry. But again, I think if Khalil Tate is the Khalil Tate of 2017, this is a much improved team, probably better than where they're predicted to finish.
I think you could be right on that. It's all going to be about how they use him. And the last one, and I think this team will finish last in the division, but again, I love the last place teams in both of these, the North and the South. Colorado with Mel Tucker coming in. This is so interesting to me. So Mel Tucker comes in right away, has a pretty good recruiting class, even with not a lot of time to get it done, and goes into Texas. This year, he's went back into Texas already. He's got some Georgia kids. They added, and I don't have the exact number, so maybe somebody in the last week or two have gotten some grad transfers or some transfer portal guys I didn't count, but they have, if not the most guys added from this team from a transfer portal. They're in the top 3 because they added almost half a roster of transfer portal guys. A lot of guys came in off this offseason to add to this team. This is a very interesting team, and you look at this team, there's some talent there. It's not like he inherited just a bottom dweller team with no playmakers.
Well, he's inheriting LaVista Chanel,
right?
Who, if it wasn't for injury, he may have saved Mike McIntyre's job.
Absolutely.
But Mel Tucker to me is my favorite coach right now because he's gone into foreign territory. And he's kind of laid down the law to say this is how you win, and you gotta follow the SEC's blueprint on this.
Yeah,
and he's not afraid to mince words with anyone in that conference, especially when he calls it a tennis shoes league.
Yeah,
which is my all-time favorite line right now about the Pac-12. And of all places to do it in Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah,
which you go back to Bill McCartney days. To find the kind of talent they used to have, you got to go back to that because those were beasts that played for McCartney back in the late 80s and 90s. I mean, they were competing for national championships. But he's not afraid to upset the apple cart, and that league needs that.
Yes, they do.
And he can be the trendsetter for the Pac-12 if they want to become relevant again. And you and I both like what he built at Georgia. Mm-hmm. And he's taking that to Colorado, and I really like it. I think he's going to be a trendsetter for the Pac-12, and I really think the future for Colorado is bright. They've got some nice parts. They may get 6 games. It's going to be hard, but they may get 6 games and win a bowl. because of just some of the offensive talent that they have. And Mel Tucker might win 2 or 3 just because of his presence and his motivational skills. But I really like the future in Boulder.
I don't know how he's going to be as far as a head coach and as far as managing a program and scheming up for teams week in and week out. But this is a guy that has 2 national championship rings, one from Alabama, one from Ohio State, had a very successful stint at Georgia, also was in the NFL for a long time with the Bears. He's got an impressive resume, and he knows how to recruit, and he's got a fantastic personality. He reminds me a little bit of Steve Spurrier in this media tour, just, ready, shoot, aim kind of mentality of when he answers questions.
Again,
and I love it.
I do too.
Looking at this team, defensively, they've got some good players on this defense.
Yes,
really
they
do. I think this might be bold. I think next to Utah, they're the second best front 7 in the Pac-12. Their front 7 is very good.
Well, Nate Landman can flat out play.
Yeah, and Mustafa Johnson's going to play on Sundays. So, they have a lot of talent here. And their secondary is not bad. They're pretty decent. There's just no depth. That's the thing. There's
they can't
no depth.
Get hurt.
They're going to rely on a lot of guys that have transferred in to play important roles. Offensively, you mentioned Laviska Shenault. They don't have anybody proven that's ran the football, which I think could potentially be an issue. They've got a lot of guys with not much experience at all. And Steven Montez, this offense is going to kind of live and die by him. And he's an exciting player, and he's a good player, but he's also a guy that makes some mistakes, makes some ill-timed passes, and he's an up-and-down player. And I think that's the perfect way to describe this team. They're an up-and-down team, and they get it from their quarterback. And they got to do a better job protecting him. Last year, they were awful on first and second down. He had so many 3rd and 8s, 3rd and 9s, 3rd and 7s. They cannot live in that land anymore. They have to get better, get out of the 3rd and longs. If they can do that and they can find a way to help him run the ball, I'm with you. I think there will be improvement. I don't know if that improvement will result to more than 6 wins, which would be an improvement, but I think they will be better. Looking at their schedule, I really like, Colorado State. Yeah, we all like that game. It's rivalry games on a Friday night. We'll watch.
In Denver.
Week 2, Nebraska at home.
Hey, it's Nebraska, Colorado.
That is an exciting game on so many levels, just to judge where these teams are. And even the Air Force game, week 3, they're coming out swinging. Week 4 at Arizona State, this we're going to know what they are by September.
Yeah, and then Arizona comes in as well, and then they go to Oregon and Washington State. That is a tremendous start. And, again, I think Mel Tucker, just as you and I have described him, he might squeeze 1 or 2 wins out of this team just by his personality and his motivation alone.
Yeah.
But to me, when I look at this team, if they get any kind of production from the running game, that'll – 6 wins is the ceiling. But if they can get any kind of production from the running game, they can reach that ceiling.
All right. Well, we've broken down all the teams. Let's take a break, and we're going to put a bow on this and give you who's going to win these divisions and who will be your Pac-12 champion in a game that's attended by probably 2,000 people.
College football fans, check out the College Football Debrief. Here's a sample of what you get.
You start looking at the daggum schedules of who all these teams have played. Alabama's resume is not very impressive. Now, they beat the crap out of people. There's no doubt about that. But, who have they played? So it makes you wonder, all right, Georgia, push them. What are they going to do? When you push the bully in your neighborhood, what are they going to do to come back to you?
I think I caught you in a fired-up mood this time.
You do. You got me, man. I'm ready. I'm ready for Saturday at 4 o'clock. Let's go.
You can catch the College Football Debrief on Spreaker, SoundCloud, iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. Check out the College Football Debrief on the OSG Podcasting Network.
Welcome back to your OSG Sports previews of everything college football. And since we're discussing things, how many teams are in the Pac 10, 12, 14 now, Hod? How many?
12, but that probably could change in the next 3-4 years.
Okay, so the Pac-12 10, or the Pac-10 12, for those of us of a certain vintage. Time to catch up with the grand exalted poobah of everything, devilsdigest.com, Hod Rabino, friend of the network. Hod, it's that time of year where you're looking at 2-a-days, 3-a-days, 4-a-days, and corporate structures, and it all involves football in the desert. Thanks for hanging out with us again.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me, as always.
All right, so year one of the Herm Edwards administration ends in a Vegas Bowl loss to Fresno, 31-20. I guess what are some of the, from 30,000 feet, what are some of the overarching things that stuck with you in year one?
Well, it was really interesting, and I know you and I talked, I believe, fairly shortly after Herm Edwards was hired, that the expectations, especially by the national media, were set so low. You have very respected guys like Bruce Feldman saying that ASU was going to win 3 games total, not in the Pac-12, but just total, just because Herm Edwards is the new head coach. And it just created a framework where there was really nothing for ASU to go but up. And at 7-6, look, it's not a season that you really brag about and shoot from the rooftops that I arrived or anything like that. But again, with the expectations and just the whole perception of the program being set so low, that actually was considered somewhat successful, somewhat of a surprise. Again, just depends on how harshly or how favorably you did view the Herm Edwards hire. The loss to Fresno State at the bowl game, I think, left somewhat of a sour taste in a lot of fans' mouths. Then again, you have beating your arch rival Arizona 41-40, starting the fourth quarter down 19 points. So maybe if you're an ASU fan, you hang on to that. You hang on to the fact that you beat UCLA and USC in the same year, which, granted, both programs are down right now, but that's something that doesn't happen often in Tempe. Even the Pac-12 South champions, Utah, you annihilated at home of 38-20. So, but again, when you have a 7-6 record, obviously you're barely over 500, and it's probably as much good as much bad to talk about the program. And I don't think it's a program that's going to regress in 2019. I just don't know how much better they're going to be. They definitely have some very important question marks to answer.
I was going to say, since you're getting into this particular section and we're only a couple of weeks away from the season on the whole, how are they answering those questions right now with really only things going on in shorts and limited contact? I mean, obviously every team has questions, but how do you see Herm Edwards and everybody addressing them so far, as we're in toe touchies and light pads right now?
Well, the low-hanging fruit question here in Tempe is obviously who's going to be the starting quarterback. You have the only returning player from last year, Dylan Sterling Cole, who has very limited experience. And ASU brought in 3 true freshmen. The most heralded out of the 3, Jaden Daniels, rated the number 2 or 3 dual threat quarterback in the 2019 class, is battling Dylan Sterling Cole. Probably at this point has a slight edge over him very, very early here in preseason practices. So that's going to be your 2-man race. And basically you're going to have an inexperienced signal caller behind center. And it's just anybody's guess how that dynamic affects the rest of the offense. Now, the good news for the Sun Devils is that they have a lot of experience, a lot of proven players pretty much at every position on offense. They were supposed to have an all-senior offensive line, but one of their linemen, Zach Robertson, right now is not practicing. Remains to see what's going to happen in the long term. So now they have a redshirt freshman, Jared Bell, at center, which could be a somewhat daunting proposition, especially when you talk about a position that is so important, really, being the quarterback of the offensive line. But I think the fact that he has so much experience around him can probably make his transition a little smoother than some may think. But that's how things are shaping on offense, and obviously having Benjamin, who in my opinion is one of the best running back in the Pac-12, but I think easily top 5 running back in all of college football. So I think on offense, things are looking pretty well. Again, you got a huge question mark to solve at quarterback, but if you can, you're really sitting pretty over there. At defense, a lot of proven talent in terms of linebacker and defensive back, but at defensive line, you just have a lot of newcomers, and in my opinion, really have to hit the ground running because you had only 3 returning scholarship players that played last year and in that group. So I'm really curious to see how everything is going to shape up over there, because if they can figure out that defensive line and really all the bodies that they added to this team are not just bodies on the roster, but actually talented players that can really enhance the overall level of that group, then I think this defense, which I thought under defensive coordinator Danny Gonzalez made major strides from 2017 and 2018, can really kick it up to the next level. So again, overall, I don't feel like Arizona State should have a worse record than they did last year at 7-6, but how much can they improve on it? Like I said, those 2 question marks that I mentioned, quarterback, defensive line, if they're answered successfully, then I could see this team definitely taking the next step in a Pac-12 South that, much like last year, is really, really wide open. A lot of teams like Arizona State have as many question marks, if not more, and it could be a very ripe opportunity for the Sun Devils to really elevate themselves that much more in Herm Edwards' only second year with the program.
And you mentioned how things are right now with the Pac-12, and you have a lot of the marquee programs that are trying to figure themselves out. You have Chip Kelly trying to sit there and figure out, okay, this is how I want things to be at UCLA. You have a lot of the marquee names that are in downtime, and it could be one of those where all of these teams that are trying to get back to where they were beating each other up, and everybody ends up just kind of staying where they were over last year. But I think that, to your point, I think that when you look at the schedule before you get into Pac-12 play, I think that having an experience going up against folks like Kent and Sacramento State and having to go all the way to East Lansing on September 14th, I think that probably would help that inexperience to get you off to that big start that you're looking for, to get you back to that 7-5, 8-4-ish kind of a finish. True?
Yeah, I think it's true. I think the fact that you have 7 home games means that, okay, if you can just win 6 out of the 7, let's say, then obviously you're putting yourself in a great position to, at worst, match the total amount of wins that you had last year. The thing about the non-conference schedule prior to Michigan State, you just have to be careful of it not being fool's gold. I mean, obviously, when you play Kent State and Sacramento State, not only are you expected to win, you really expect them to blow them out of the water. You're expected to play as many players as possible, and especially now with the 4-game redshirt freshman rule, I'm really curious to see how many freshmen actually get to see the field in Tempe in week 1 and week 2. But you just have to really put things in perspective, and at the end of the day, take a true assessment of yourself as a team and say, okay, am I ready to face a team like Michigan State, like you said, on the road in East Lansing, and really have a chance to be successful? Because even though if you're going to blow out those 2 teams, Kent State and Sacramento State, by 30, 35 points, again, is that fool's gold, or is that a true indication that maybe you're better than some others thought you were? But especially with an inexperienced quarterback, sure, that gets some confidence under the belt, and really having just increased cohesion and chemistry with all your weapons, with your offensive line. But the Michigan State game on the road is definitely going to be a litmus test, and maybe one that, even if you, but despite your best efforts, things do not go well for you that day, maybe make sure that you can take as many positives, as many constructive criticism out of that game, and not let it affect you the rest of the way. Because I think that when you look at the beginning of a Pac-12 schedule, you're playing at home at Colorado, very winnable game. on the road at California. Could be somewhat challenging, but I think also a winnable game too. So really, you have a good chance to start the season out at 4-1, and if you start the season out at 4-1, there's no reason to believe that at worst matching your seven total wins from last year is going to be far fetched or anything like that. So yes, ASU does have a good chance to start on a good note the 2019 season. But as we both mentioned, that inexperienced at quarterback, if those two games can really help them later on, then it was definitely worth it. Even though those two what should be lopsided wins may not be a true indicator of where your program really is at.
And you mentioned those home games. You've got Colorado at home. Cal, you don't know which Cal team you're going to get when you go to Berkeley. You get Washington State in a transition because you obviously when you have a quarterback go away, that obviously the Pirate and Mike Leach, it's going to be interesting. But you have them at home. The big test in the middle of October is at Utah. Then you get UCLA. And we know once again where they are and the rough time that Chip Kelly had in year one. You know the rough time that USC is currently having, but you get them in Tempe. Then you go to Corvallis, a winnable game, and then you end up with Oregon and Arizona in Tempe. So there is, if things work out the right way, that number that you and I were talking about at the beginning of this seems fairly attainable.
Yeah, exactly. I really like the schedule, as you mentioned, because you are getting really most of your toughest opponents at home. I mean, really the only tough Pac-12 road game they have is Utah. Huge test. Probably much like last year, could be the battle for the South Division Championship. And really just overall in terms of just challenging games. And then you also have Michigan State on the road. But yeah, I mean, by default, when you play 7 home games, it's really a great chance to gain some momentum as the season progresses. And yeah, sure. Like I said, the caliber of opponents that you're getting at home versus the caliber of opponents you're getting on road, things I think are shaping really well for Arizona State in that manner. Again, I'll just point to the month of September. It's definitely very feasible for them to start out 4-1, and if they do, I think that can really set the tone for the rest of the way. Now, we did see an Arizona State team in 2016 start out 5-1 and end up losing 5-7. So I'm sure that maybe some Sun Devil fans listening to this podcast right now are definitely going to point to that fact. I just like to think it's a different team than it was last year, not only because of the head coach change, but just because of the whole culture and the level of talent that is different from 2016. So yeah, I think starting out strong, maybe having your only early loss be at Michigan State can really bode well for ASU, and again prove that those two question marks, quarterback and defensive line, were answered successfully, and that is something that is going to be absolutely paramount in ASU's chances to taking that next step, however small or big that step will be.
One question before we go, and thanks for hanging out with us as always. Has everyone adjusted, whether it's a fan or all of those who are looking at the program from an external point of view, whether it's fans, media, what have you, has everyone kind of adjusted to the Herm Edwards CEO-ish business aspect of the way that Arizona State is going about things now, or is it still kind of a transition, and are there still some raised eyebrows as to what in the wide world of sports is going on there with this approach in the desert?
Well, sure. I think some fans might be just Todd Graham disciples, if you will. We're not happy with the coaching change and the way it was done. We're not happy that a coach that did go 7-6 in his last year in Tempe was still fired, even though ironically 2 coaches ago, Dirk Cutter had back-to-back 7-5 seasons before he got fired back then in 2006. So sure, you're always going to have that faction that's going to point to Todd Graham winning 7 games in his last year ASU needing to shell out a $10 million buyout, and this is not a school like Ohio State or Texas that has $10 million in between the cushions of their couch or anything like that. So that, with the fact that Ray Anderson has a long friendship with Herm Edwards, was obviously his agent back when Herm Edwards was coaching the NFL, and you can make those nepotism hooking up a friend with a job claims. I do understand that, but I think for the most part, when you see players talk about the culture change, when you hear what Herm Edwards has to say out there in the local and the national media, and as we know, Herm Edwards loves to talk. Herm Edwards never turns down any opportunity. You just get a different vibe around the program. The recruiting classes have been okay since Herm Edwards has come on board, but you're seeing a lot of players that maybe didn't have eye-popping accolades out of high school playing well in their first year in Tempe. So there are definitely some encouraging signs that Herm Edwards, the change of culture, the pro model, however you want to phrase it, is really having some early positive results. Obviously, if you're not going forward, you're going backwards, and that's why it's imperative for the perception of the program to continue forward. And again, I think especially in the Pac-12 South, it's a very ripe opportunity right now. I would say even compared to the Pac-12 North, where you have juggernauts like Washington, Oregon, duking it out. Stanford, a program you can never count out. That's, I think, a environment less conducive for success, especially for a new head coach to really make their mark compared to the Pac-12 South. So I think Arizona State really is in a great opportunity, a great place to show that hire of Herm Edwards is yielding a lot of the benefits that athletic director Ray Anderson and the brass there in Tempe thought would yield this early in the process. So I think by and large fans are happy. You're never going to please everybody until you win that first Pac-12 South championship under Herm Edwards, let alone possibly win a Pac-12 championship, let alone possibly win a Rose Bowl, let alone maybe even qualifying for the playoffs. So obviously, winning cures all ills. Herm Edwards did some of that in year one. Now, if he can do more of that in year two, year three, I think the critics, which are definitely right now the minority compared to December of 2017, are going to be even more and more a quieter voice, if you will, going forward.
All right. Time for the promo. For those that want to keep up with everything going on with Devil's Digest and you and everything out in the desert, how do they do it?
Yeah, just log into the devilsdigest.com on the internet. You can read our numerous practice reports and just stories coming out of the first preseason practices for the Sun Devils. We have a great promotion going on right now that if you sign as a new annual subscriber, you not only get 25% off your first year, but you also get a $75 e-card to the Adidas store. Arizona State being an Adidas school right now, that is definitely right up your alley. It's an e-card you can use right now to get gear for the season opener, or it's an e-card you can save for a rainy day, i.e. the holidays, to give to yourself or give to somebody else as a gift. So definitely a great promotion going on right now, and just in time for gearing up for the 2019 season. And on Twitter, we can be found at Devil's Digest, obviously tweeting out all our stories over there and just different tidbits that are taking place right now as the Sun Devils begin preseason practices.
What he said, our guide, our Sherpa, our everything, our focus, the man that we focus on when it comes to everything in the Pac-12 with a focus in Tempe. He is definitely the guy that we look at when it comes to everything going on out there. Hod Rabino, Grand Exalted Poobah, everything Devil's Digest, devilsdigest.com. Thanks for hanging out with us here for the Pac-12 preview. We'll be catching up with you down the road.
Appreciate it, John. Thank you very much.
All right, when we come back, the Pac-12, the Pac-10, the Pac-14, however many there are, the preview continues. You're listening to OSG Sports and the College Football Debriefs preview style. We'll be right back after this.
The OSG Sports app is up and running on your Android or iPhone. Install the OSG Sports app and listen to our podcast from college football, soccer, and lacrosse. What are you waiting for? Get the OSG Sports app today.
And welcome back as we come to the closing stretch of our Pac-12 preview. Anthony Goldman, John Wilkerson sitting beside me here. And John, I took a little shot at the Pac-12 going to break. They did only have 21,000 announced attendance last year for their Pac-12 championship. It was probably more like 14,000. And I can verify that you could buy a ticket on the game day for $10. So the price it would cost you for 2 meals at McDonald's, you could go watch the Pac-12 championship. And this year,
as I recall,
Stadium.
Back at Levi's Stadium, as I recall, the weather was awful.
The weather was awful. It's more expensive to buy a pair of Levi's than it is to go to the game. How about that? So when we get to this game, who's going to be in it, John? Who are your winners from the North and the South?
I'm going to go with the Ducks in the North and Utah in the South. I'm going to go with what the media says. I think they're the two best teams in each division, and they'll meet in Levi's Stadium. What kind of excites me about that is they both have really good fan bases. It's just whether they want to spend the $10 to buy a ticket.
Right. Yes. Now, I will say Utah travels in droves when they actually do travel pretty well. I've experienced that, unfortunately, in New Orleans for a Sugar Bowl, but they travel pretty well. So, all right, so you're going with the media, and who is winning that game?
I like Utah because they're the most complete team in the Pac-12. And if they can stay away from injury, as we mentioned, this is a team that could be special. Things that got to fall their way, but it's a possibility, and I really like Utah on this one.
I'm with you on Utah. I think that when you look at the Pac-12 South, it's very competitive 2 through 6. I do think, even though it's a minimal gap, I do think that there is a gap, though, between Utah and everybody else. I think Utah is just so complete of a team. They do have questions. It's not that, this isn't Alabama or Clemson we're talking about, but for the schedule they play and the division that they're in, they just have more answers than they do questions, which you can't say the same about for their opponents. And the Pac-12 North, it's pretty interesting. I mean, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Washington State, they all are any one of those four could win this division. Now, Oregon is the favorite. And Oregon on paper with Justin Herbert and some of those great defensive players, if Kayvon Thibodeau has the freshman impact that we think he might, they are probably the most talented roster, but it's hard to count out Washington and what they've done in the past. Mike Leach, we keep waiting on them to fall back, and they never do. So that's going to be the race to watch. Right now in, summertime, getting ready for camp, it's hard to not pick Oregon. It really is. So I think I'm going to go the same. I think Utah wins this conference, though. I don't think they're unscathed. I think they come close. I think that they probably have one loss, and it's even a close loss. They will not get in the playoff. There will be maybe one or two murmurs on Selection Day that are like, hey, what about Utah? But it won't be real. But I think that Utah this year gets that big win. This is the closest Utah Utes team I've seen as being complete. You'd have to go back to 2008, 2009. I think that they are at that level.
Interesting, and I agree. I think Utah is the class right now of the Pac-12. If they don't get into the playoff, and let's say they go 11-1 and win it, I guess that means it'd be 12-1. Where's the Pac-12? Where do they go from there? There's going to be, there might be a little bit of an uproar out west. I don't know. They tend to think of other things, but what does this league have to do?
Right. Well, we started on kind of a negative, and we're going to end on kind of a negative because the football in this conference, let me just say, I know a lot of people that aren't on the West Coast kind of snuck their noses up and they're like, Pac-12 football. This is good football. We just broke it down. These are some good teams.
These are good teams.
Fantastic players that are going to be playing on Sundays, and some good coaches. They really are. This conference has just been mismanaged, and it's been misrun, and you have to go to the kooky, crazy commissioner, Larry Scott, and some of the bad decisions that he's made. And I hate it for Larry Scott in some ways because when Larry Scott first got that job, he had some outside-the-box ideas that I really liked. They remember Stanford opened the season in Asia a couple years ago.
Yeah,
and,
that's true.
They went into the international market. They did all these crazy things. Australia. And I really liked his idea of globalization. They were the first conference I remember to do the now prototypical ESPN car wash thing, where all the coaches come through, Sanford, Connecticut, and they do all the interviews that day on ESPN. They were the first ones to do that. I think they had their media day there, as a matter of fact. So he's always thought outside the box, and I like that side of him. Unfortunately, he's done some questionable things with the finances, which has come to light this summer. He did a terrible idea of marketing and strategically building the Pac-12 network, which has been a disaster. And I think that the only way this conference is going to start seeing the daylight again is they have to start over at the top. They got to get someone new in charge, get a new commissioner in, and try to right this ship. And I don't think it's going to happen quick. Yeah. I think off seasons are going to be tough for the Pac-12 for the next upcoming years. But I think in the falls, we will still be seeing some pretty good football.
I agree with you on that point. I think the other point is that either UCLA or USC, in particular USC, has to be back at the top of college football. Yeah. USC is your gold standard. I think that really hurts this conference. As good as Oregon and Utah are, they just don't move the needle nationally.
Right.
They're programs that you and I appreciate and we'll watch and we will raise a banner for.
Yeah.
But nationally, to the casual fan, they just don't resonate, and there's where the Pac-12 is having issues.
This is a meme conference. This is a meme conference. Hashtag Pac-12 After Dark. People like saying things about the Pac-12. They like talking about Gardner Minshew and wearing the mustaches, and it's all funny, and we like quoting Mike Leach press conferences, and people like to talk about them, but they don't necessarily watch them.
Right.
And you can contribute some of that to the start times without a doubt. But I think that there's more underlying problems than that. I think we're past the point of saying, well, the Pac-12 is not appreciated because it's on at 10 o'clock East Coast. There's other issues with the way this conference is ran that I think have built up past that argument now.
Well, we'd love to hear from the Pac-12 fans, so get on our Twitter page at OSG Sports and let us know, especially you people on the West Coast who live and die by the Pac-12 football. Let us know your thoughts about how this conference can be better. That's our Twitter page at OSG Sports, and if we get a good amount of those, we'll read them on the air.
Well, John, this was fun. I enjoyed this. You gave me the reins. I ran point. We're kind of all over the place.
You have to run point more often.
I enjoyed this. Well, don't put me on the spot because we still got 3 other, Power 5 conferences to break down. So you want to do the honors? We broke
this one down.
Do you have one ready, or do you want me to just pick one?
You pick one.
I will just pick one. Up next, we're going to do ACC. ACC breakdown will be our next conference preview, so keep it tuned. And look, if you're getting ready for college football season, keep listening because we're going to have you covered, getting you ready all the way up till kickoff.
So, for Anthony Goldman, I'm John Wilkerson. So long, everyone.